UN depends on having access across the Turkish border to get to those rebel areas where the crisis is worse than anywhere else in the country, because so many people in there in those areas have fled from other parts of Syria. So it's the area is full of IDPs and people who have nothing, basically. The Ukraine war has made things worse, both diplomatically and in terms of the humanitarian situation in Syria. And the diplomacy has to do with, every year this resolution has to be renewed. And every year it takes US-Russian negotiations to sort of stitch together a basic compromise. But this year there's basically no contact between the United States and Russia because of the Ukraine war. So it remains to be seen whether they can actually stitch together that deal. And in humanitarian terms, the war in Ukraine has led to radical rise in grain prices, wheat and other things that both Ukraine and Russia are major exporters of, and fuel prices as well. And all of that affects the situation inside Syria and the Syrian economy and the Turkish economy as well, of course. And it also makes things more costly for aid groups. I spoke to a UN official who told me that he thinks that even if other groups, private NGOs and the Red Crescent in Turkey and others, could scale up their efforts without UN support, it won't be enough to fill the gap if the UN agencies are pulled out of that border crossing effort. So his estimate was that about 1 million people of the 2.4 million who currently receive aid from the UN and others will be left without food aid. And that's a recipe for disaster, I think. Since 2019, approximately, a lot of things have happened to affect the Syrian economy and also the Turkish economy, which these areas depend on in part. And that, it's a complex story, but it has to do with a breakdown in Syrian state finances linked to a banking crisis in Lebanon, has to do with COVID-19, has to do with intensified US sanctions. And of course, this happens against a backdrop of, as I said, 11 years of war. So people are exhausted and savings are gone since a long time. So I think there are some reasons for optimism as well, not least that, Russia is bogged down in Ukraine and has, a lot of its policy at the moment in Syria is riding on the cooperation of Turkey, which is invested in these areas. So it's unlikely, I think at least, that the Russians will want to antagonize the Turks by vetoing this resolution. But on the other hand, you have this situation of sort of a broken diplomatic system, and you have years and years of Russian complaints that they feel have not been addressed, and so there's a lot of bad blood already. And every year it's a tense moment before